In 1940, the world was obsessed with metal. Every great bomber was a heavy, steel-ribbed fortress bristling with machine guns. But Britain had a problem. They were running out of aluminum. The meta of air warfare was becoming too expensive. Then, a company called de Havilland proposed a glitch. They wanted to build a high-speed bomber out of plywood and balsa wood. The Air Ministry laughed. They called it the flying furniture. They thought a wooden plane would be a slow, flaming coffin. They were wrong. They had accidentally stumbled upon the first stealth supercar. The de Havilland Mosquito was built on a radical theory. Armor is a trap. Most bombers were heavy because they carried tons of steel plating and defensive turrets to fight off interceptors. The Mosquito stripped all of it. It had 0 guns for defense, no armor, just 2 massive Merlin engines strapped to a wooden frame. Because it weighed almost nothing, it was faster than the fighter jets trying to kill it. It didn't need to fight. It simply outran the enemy's ability to aim. It was the ultimate speed hack. But the real exploit wasn't just speed, it was a radar glitch. Early German radar, the Freya system, was calibrated to detect the metallic reflection of steel wings. The Mosquito, being made of organic material, wood and glue, had a naturally low radar cross-section. It was a ghost plane decades before the F-117 Nighthawk. By the time the German radar operators saw a tiny flickering blip, the Mosquito was already over the target, dropping 4,000 pounds of explosives and disappearing back into the clouds. January 30th, 1943 was supposed to be the greatest day in the history of Nazi propaganda. It was the 10th anniversary of their rise to power, and the entire German nation was commanded to sit by their radios to hear the masters of the Reich speak. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe and the man who had famously boasted that if a single enemy plane ever flew over the Reich, his name should be Meyer, was scheduled to address the nation at exactly 11 in the morning from the heart of Berlin. He stood at the podium in the Air Ministry, surrounded by microphones and the elite of the German military, ready to project an image of total invincibility. But as he opened his mouth to speak, something impossible happened. The sound of air raid sirens began to wail through the streets of Berlin. High above the city, 3 de Havilland Mosquitoes from the 105 Squadron were screaming through the air at 400 miles per hour. They had flown over 600 miles at low level, hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection, and arrived over the target with mathematical precision. Just as Göring began his broadcast, the first 500-pound bombs crashed into the broadcasting station. On the live radio feed, millions of Germans didn't hear a heroic speech. They heard the sound of panic, the muffled thud of explosions, and then a deafening, terrifying silence. The feed went dead for over an hour. The invincible Reich had been muted by 3 wooden planes built in furniture factories. This wasn't just a military strike, it was a psychological demolition. The British had discovered a glitch in the Nazi facade. They realized that the Mosquito's speed was so extreme that it didn't need to fight its way into Berlin. It could simply arrive, deliver a message of humiliation, and leave before the German interceptors could even warm up their engines. The embarrassment for the Nazi leadership was absolute, but the day wasn't over. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, attempted to salvage the anniversary by scheduling his own speech for 4 in the afternoon at the Berlin Sports Palace. He assumed the British had exhausted their daring and that the morning raid was a lucky fluke. But at exactly 4 o'clock, as if following a script, a second wave of Mosquitoes from the 139 Squadron appeared out of the clouds over Berlin. Once again, the sirens screamed. Once again, the bombs fell. The supercar of the skies had turned the most heavily defended city on Earth into its personal playground. It was a double tap to the ego of the Third Reich that left Hermann Göring in a state of legendary fury.
In secret meetings with German aircraft designers later that year, Göring had a complete breakdown. He gathered men like Messerschmitt and Heinkel and shouted at them that it made him green and yellow with envy to see the British, who could afford aluminum better than Germany, knocking together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory in England was building. He was obsessed with the fact that a primitive material like wood was outperforming his billion-mark jet projects. He couldn't understand how a plane held together with casein glue and wood screws was making his entire air force look obsolete. The exploit of the wooden wonder didn't stop at radio interruptions. As the war progressed, the Mosquito became the ultimate sniper of the sky. Because the plane was made of organic material, it had a naturally low radar cross-section, making it the first true stealth aircraft. This allowed them to perform missions that were considered impossible for any other bomber. In 1945, during Operation Carthage, the Danish resistance begged the RAF to destroy the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, which was located in a massive building called the Shell House. The problem was that the Gestapo had filled the attic with Allied prisoners to act as human shields. Any normal bombing run would have leveled the entire city block. But the Mosquito crews flew so low they were literally dodging tram lines and flying between apartment buildings. They released their bombs at a flat trajectory, skipping them off the pavement and into the first floor of the building. The precision was so high that they destroyed the Gestapo's files and killed the officers on the lower levels, while allowing many of the prisoners in the roof to escape. It was a level of tactical precision that wouldn't be seen again until the age of laser-guided munitions. The Mosquito proved that the most sophisticated weapon isn't always made of the most advanced materials. By using wood and speed, the British had bypassed the entire German defense system and turned a furniture maker's project into a weapon that haunted the dreams of the Nazi high command.
The legacy of the wooden Mosquito didn't vanish when the fires of the Second World War went out. Instead, it laid the foundation for the most expensive and secretive technology in modern history. To understand why the world's most advanced air forces are moving back toward composite materials, you have to understand the physics exploit that the Mosquito first tapped into in the 1940s. While every other nation was obsessed with perfecting high-grade aluminum and titanium, the designers of the Mosquito had accidentally stumbled upon the primary rule of modern stealth. Metal is a beacon. Radar works by bouncing radio waves off conductive surfaces. A metal wing acts like a mirror, reflecting those waves directly back to the source. But wood, being an organic non-conductor, absorbed or scattered those waves. The Mosquito was a ghost not because it was high-tech, but because it was low-tech in exactly the right way. This realization eventually triggered a massive shift in aerospace engineering that led directly to the development of the F-117 Nighthawk and the B-2 Spirit. Modern stealth fighters are essentially the Mosquito's grandchildren. Today, we don't use plywood and balsa, but we use carbon fiber, fiberglass, and specialized resins, all of which are composites that share the same non-conductive properties as the Mosquito's wooden frame. When you look at the smooth, seamless skin of a modern B-21 Raider, you aren't looking at a traditional airplane. You are looking at a shell that is built more like a high-end boat or a piece of expensive furniture than a traditional metal jet. The plywood glitch has become the trillion-dollar standard. The engineers of 1943 proved that if you want to be invisible, you have to stop thinking like a blacksmith and start thinking like a carpenter. This shift changed the very nature of how we build things to survive in a world of digital sensors. But the Mosquito's impact goes beyond just materials. It pioneered the concept of the multi-role exploit. Before the Mosquito, an airplane was either a fighter, a bomber, or a scout. It had one job coded into its airframe. The Mosquito broke that code. Because its wooden frame was so easy to modify, requiring only saws and glue instead of massive metal presses, the British were able to turn it into a night fighter, a torpedo bomber, a photo reconnaissance ghost, and even a transport for high-value targets. It was the first universal platform. This is the same logic used today for the F-35 Lightning II. The world has realized that a single, highly adaptable shell that can be rapidly updated is far more dangerous than a fleet of specialized metal giants. The Mosquito was the first plane in history that could be patched in real time. If they needed a bigger bomb bay, they simply cut the wood and glued in a new section. Ultimately, the story of the cardboard bomber is a lesson in engineering humility. It reminds us that the best material isn't always the newest or the most expensive. It's the one that solves the problem in the most efficient way. The Third Reich spent their final years desperately trying to build the Me-262, a revolutionary jet fighter made of rare metals that they couldn't find and powered by engines that burned out in 10 hours. Meanwhile, the British were winning the war with spruce, birch, and the labor of men who used to build bedroom closets. The Mosquito was the ultimate low-cost, high-impact weapon. It proved that a furniture factory could outproduce a steel mill, and that a wooden toy could outrun a miracle of German science. Even today, as we look toward the future of drone swarms and disposable, attritable aircraft, engineers are looking back at the Mosquito's blueprints. They are realizing that in a massive conflict, the side that can build the fastest, cheapest, and most invisible weapon out of common materials will always have the upper hand. The plywood glitch wasn't just a World War II trick, it was the birth of the modern way of war.